Good morning. I have to take that breath because I am so blown away to be on this side of the church. Usually, I'm back there. So to see you all this morning, to be present with you, and to talk about something that is so important to my heart brings me such joy. When I start to think about things that are good news for me, I'm often drawn to two expressions, both an exclamation point and an exhale. And when I think about these moments of good news, I start to bring to my consciousness moments like a job acceptance after searching for the right fit, finding out I'd be bringing home my very, very fluffy and energetic 2-month-old puppy Tank. Or maybe it was when a mentor surprised me when I needed her the most. While each memory and moment of good news has its own individual flavor, these moments are fastened together by their similarities. They are moments in time worthy of equal parts celebration and relief. As you're sitting here with me in the sanctuary or joining us online, I invite you to get comfortable in your seat, to think about a time when you received good news. Let those moments percolate to the top of your mind. I wonder if in your body you can feel the exclamation point that I'm talking about, or maybe the exhale of relief. For some, good news may look like another birthday celebrated, or getting a job offer that will take your family from a means of survival to a place of thriving. For others, good news may be a doctor sharing signs of remission, or maybe becoming aware of a pattern that just no longer serves you. The beauty of good news is often like the tides. It ebbs and flows in celebration and relief, and offers us a beautiful gift, the gift of liberation. The dual feeling of both celebration and relief when we receive good news can open our hearts and minds to see the world in a different way. The liberation that we receive from good news is often like hospitality, ushering us from one space to another. Often when I am facing times of trial and difficulty, I manifest the liberative energy of good news in the form of a meditation. If you know me, you know I love North Carolina. So I try to visualize my beloveds gathered together at a lake, swimming and splashing, joyfully basking in communal celebration. Now, besides North Carolina, the second thing you need to know that if I'm celebrating, there's going to be cheap wine, store-bought cake, and most definitely balloons. Laughter is abundant, and the sun gently kisses our skin. We show up as ourselves fully and abundantly, and we are not scared of being seen in the celebration and in the spirit of connection. We welcome others who seek to join us as well, and we all collectively sing, "All are welcome here." The meditation that I imagine is not so different from our reading for today. Anastasia E.B. Kidd's poem speaks to the very liberative energy of good news, one where a woman exists freely in her own body, intimately knowing every piece of her being. The way she acknowledges her fat, her ripples and worth, honoring every curve, dimple, and roll, is a beautiful depiction of celebration. If I close my eyes, I can see this woman as if the words are coming right off the page and bringing her to life. A fat woman dancing fluidly, open to the rhythm around her, for all she hears is the music, and all she feels is that divinity within. This type of freedom, this very freedom, is an act of resistance in a world where white supremacy and capitalism run rampant on bodies. However, And we've got to find that, however, it is the woman's lack of repentance and posture towards her understanding of self that is the very liberation of good news. This poem, The Unrepentant Fat Woman, creates a vision of another world, a world where fatness is honored and wholeheartedly welcomed, a world where fat existence is not questioned, and as we know, the inherent worth and dignity of all people is a universal human song. Friends, the good news I offer today is that the unrepentant fat woman does not have to be imagined or envisioned. Instead, the unrepentant fat woman could be the standard for our individual and collective liberation. Today, I come offering with joy and lots of celebration, fat liberation as good news, both an exclamation point and an exhale. Fat liberation as good news is a party like no other, I am telling you, one where all are welcome, and I mean all, and everyone is greeted with care and with dignity. Contrary to what society has taught us, the word fat, and therefore the concept of fatness, is a neutral word to describe a body. Now, historically, the descriptor fat has been associated with concepts such as laziness, unworthiness, and most readily, choice. It isn't necessarily fatness that people are avoiding. It's the unfair stereotypes and treatments around fatness that create this big fissure between fear and liberation. Now, I want to check in. I just wonder how hearing the word fat feels. If the word fat is hard to say, or the concept of fat liberation is hard to conceptualize, you are not alone. I struggled with this myself for some time. The word fat, and thus fatness, is ingrained in us by society to avoid it. We have been taught to disregard fatness due to the invisible hand of systemic oppression, the belief that fatness and therefore fat is wrong. Something I've been working on and coming to the realization is that the good news about discomfort is that we can learn to shift our gaze and challenge our way of thinking. This act liberates our view of self and our greater worldview. The beauty of fatness is too abundant to let systems of oppression define what fatness is, a diverse assortment of goodness and true freedoms from systemic standards of what an acceptable body looks like. Now, there's a hope out there in society that oppressing fat people so that we can maintain this Eurocentric Western dream is at the root of fat oppression and maintains this anti-fat worldview I'm talking about. And much like Anastasia talks about in The Unrepentant Fat Woman, a world that was never meant to hold her. Things like fat phobia and anti-fat bias, as well as healthism, pepper our world in an attempt to marginalize and other fat people. All three are major barriers to fat liberation. We see things like fat phobia and anti-fat bias play out on mainstream TV through shows like The Biggest Loser and I Used to Be Fat, reiterating the same sentiment time and time again, that fat people are meant to change and other folks should avoid fat existence at all costs. The BMI, or the body mass index, is a problematic measurement that to this day measures the health of people, women, and men. Although never intended to be used as a medical measurement, surprise, and based off of white European cis men, the BMI continues to be a standard for health. The BMI is not only troubling for fat folks, but is also a current barrier for our trans siblings who seek gender-confirming surgeries and a major tool of racism. Now, healthism, the concept that fatness is acceptable as long as someone is healthy, is a hurdle that I believe feels the most urgent to correct in fat phobia. When we limit fat inclusion to only accepting healthy fat people, we leave out the most vulnerable and marginalized in the fat community, forgetting that fat liberation is for all, not just for some. Healthism must be understood as another limiting power dynamic to fat liberation instead of another acceptable tool of oppression. Now, one of my favorite things about Unitarian Universalism and what I find to be so beautiful about the UUA are the principles that guide all of us. The values that the UUA stands on, such as justice, respect, peace, are the great connectors in a community with diverse experiences, thoughts, and theologies. Now, we all know this. The first principle states the inherent worth and dignity of every person. This first principle deeply speaks to fat liberation. When we begin to see the inherence of fat people, you are seeing fat people and naming that fat people exist, creating visibility for other fat folks to be seen. When we see worthiness in fat people and our bodies, you are acknowledging that fatness is a form of abundance, not a hidden existence. When we see dignity, we are not only seeing dignity in fat people and treating us with care, you are also seeing dignity in yourself. You are simultaneously offering the gift of liberation from messages of self-loathing and internalized fat phobia to yourself as much as you are to another. The first principle is a call to action, not only in advocacy for others, but also to yourself. When the principle names every person, the value is not everyone but you. Instead, the value is very much inclusive of you. Systemic oppression likes to tell us a lie, that we are separate from the problem. That if we do not experience a certain type of oppression, then liberation doesn't matter to us. In short, why does caring for fatness matter if it doesn't affect you? I'd like to say that this is quite the trick question because the answer is simple. Systemic oppression influences us all, even when we don't experience the overt effects of an anti-fat world. When we forgo caring for people, and we forgo caring for people whose different experiences are different from ours, we forgo empathy and compassion and choose sympathy from a place of power, othering fat people and our existence. Anastasia writes, "This is how she loves herself, how she honors the whole of her." You see, I love to see the unrepentant fat woman in all of us. We are she. The first principle calls us to invest in all people, to care for people whose experiences are different than ours, and to fight for justice. For we are people committed to honoring the whole of her, the whole of us. Systems of oppression, as we know, tell us that we are separate, and yet liberation gathers us one by one and tells us that we are whole. She is hazardous to any society that would have her shrink. The good news of fat liberation is too life-changing to shrink, even when the system calls for it. As we begin to imagine how we can take fat liberation from this moment onward, may we be reminded of the first principle that guides us. Fat liberation is a cause that is yearning to blossom in an act of resistance, just as the prophet Tupac once said, "the rose in the concrete." Or rather, fat liberation is a rose in the concrete of the system, the true hazard to be feared, and not fatness. The good news of fat liberation is life-changing. It is hospitality. All are welcome at the table. The good news of fat liberation is acceptance that who we are is more than enough. The good news of fat liberation is that the unrepentant fat woman has space to be unrepentant. The good news of fat liberation is the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Now, wherever you are, here or online, feel the seat below you. Feel your feet beneath you. And return to the moments of good news that came to your mind's eye that we imagined earlier. The good news that brought you both an exclamation point and an exhale in your bodies. I can't help but wonder now, can fat liberation be a part of our collective good news? As you can tell, I exist in a fat body. I could tell you about the ways fat phobia and an anti-fat system have deeply, deeply impacted me. However, it feels more meaningful to share with you how I experienced the beauty of my own fatness, the good news of a fat body. I spent some time imagining a metaphor for fatness. I thought about trees and how they beautifully and boldly grow wider, becoming fatter with time and stronger with age. I considered connecting my favorite element, water, to the softness and abundance of fatness, and yet my trusty water image did not fully capture exactly what I was trying to say. It then came straight to me in my consciousness that I wasn't quite thinking fat enough. One element, one piece of creation cannot possibly illustrate the breadth and depth of my fat experience. So in the beauty and wholeness of fatness, may I leave you with this. Fatness is an abundance of forgiveness, softly extending another chance. Fatness is the tenderness of ripples, full and sweet, and the ferocity of waves. Fatness is the earth and sky meeting together as one. Fat liberation is the exclamation point and exhale of good news. And I can say it's more than worthy of cheap wine, cake, and balloons. Now will you all celebrate with me?